I don't feel safe with this hostility. It was a sentence that hung in the recycled air of the cabin like a loaded gun. It was a lie, a calculated, weaponized fabrication spoken by a woman who simply didn't want to check her luggage. But on a Tuesday morning in Post 9/11 America, those specific words, spoken by a wealthy white woman about a black woman who was sitting perfectly still, were not just a complaint. They were an activation code. Because of that single sentence, spoken at 9:45 a.m. on board Transcontinental Flight 712, the roar of commerce at John F. Kennedy International Airport was about to fall silent. Every plane, from the colossal Airbus A380s to the sleek private Gulfstreams, was about to be frozen in place. The entire airport, a city of transit, was moments away from being brought to a standstill. The reason? A single woman who had been deemed too disruptive, too aggressive, and unworthy to occupy seat 12B. But this isn't a story about an argument over an overhead bin. It is a story about what happens when quiet dignity collides with loud prejudice, and how sometimes the most powerful statement is an entire runway brought to a dead stop. Before we unravel exactly how one lie grounded the busiest airport in the country, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you believe that the truth eventually comes out, turn on notifications so you don't miss a second of this story. Now, let's go back 10 minutes, to the moment before the world stopped. Dr. Alicia Vance was a woman who lived by the clock. Not the frantic, panicked clock of a commuter running late for work, but the precise, nanosecond-calibrated clock of an atomic physicist. Her world was one of order, data, and immense, unyielding pressure that she bore with a supernatural calm. That morning, her internal clock was counting down to T-minus 12 hours until the most critical moment of her career, the final activation of the Kronos 6 Deep Space Communication Array. It was a satellite she had spent 8 years of her life designing. It was her life's work. She was flying from JFK to the launch site at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Everything was on schedule. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer and sensible trousers, she looked more like a business professor than a pioneering astrophysicist holding the keys to national defense. She carried a single regulation-sized carry-on, a sleek black case containing not clothes, but a hardened laptop with encrypted schematics and biometric security protocols. It was the only thing that could turn the satellite on. Boarding Transcontinental Flight 712 to Los Angeles, she found her seat, 12B, an aisle seat in the Economy Plus section. The window seat was occupied by a young student named Toby, his headphones already on, oblivious to the world. The middle seat was empty. Alicia slid her precious carry-on into the overhead bin directly above her seat, ensuring it was secure. It fit perfectly. As she settled in, checking her watch, the atmosphere in the aisle shifted. A woman with a cascade of blonde hair, a designer handbag that likely cost more than Alicia's first car, and a palpable air of entitlement stopped in the aisle. This was Brenda St. James. "Excuse me," Brenda said. Her voice dripped with that strange, brittle politeness that isn't polite at all, but a warning. "You're going to have to move that." Alicia looked up from her phone, blinking. "I'm sorry." Brenda gestured impatiently at the overhead bin. "My bag. It's a match set with my husband's. We need to keep them together. You've taken the last large space." She pointed to a smaller, already crammed space further down the plane. "You can probably squeeze that little thing of yours in there." Alicia glanced at her bag, then back at Brenda. The request defied physics and logic. "Ma'am, this is the bin above my assigned seat," Alicia said, her voice calm and low. "There is still room for a smaller bag next to mine. But I'm not moving my case." "It won't fit," Brenda snapped, her politeness evaporating instantly. "My husband, Jonathan St. James of St. James Capital, is in first class, but we like to keep our carry-ons together." She dropped the name as if it were a platinum credit card. "Just move your bag," Brenda demanded. "It's a simple request." It was a ridiculous request. It was a classic display of someone believing their convenience trumped all rules and courtesy. Alicia, with a multi-billion-dollar satellite launch weighing on her mind, had no time or energy for this. "With all due respect," Alicia said, her voice remaining level. "This is the designated space for this row. My bag is within regulations, and it's secure. I'm not going to move it." Brenda's face flushed a deep, angry red. To her, this wasn't a negotiation. It was an order that had been disobeyed. I can't believe the nerve, she huffed, looking around for an audience. I pay for a premium ticket, and I have to deal with this. The young student by the window, Toby, pulled off his headphones. He had seen the whole thing. Lady, he piped up. Her bag was here first. There's another open bin right across the aisle. Brenda shot him a look that could curdle milk. I'm not talking to you. I am talking to her. She turned her attention back to Alicia, her voice rising in pitch, theatrical and loud. Some people are just so aggressive. There it was. The label. Aggressive. It was a label Alicia had encountered before, a weaponized adjective often used to describe black women who simply stood their ground. She felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest, but her expression remained neutral. Ma'am, nobody is being aggressive, Alicia said. I am simply sitting in my seat. At that moment, a flight attendant named Justin approached, drawn by Brenda's raised voice. He was young, harried, and clearly overwhelmed by the boarding process. Is there a problem here? Justin asked. Yes, Brenda exclaimed, seizing the opportunity. She clutched her chest. This woman is refusing to follow instructions and is becoming very aggressive with me. She's yelling. I asked her to move her bag so I could place mine, and she became belligerent. I'm shaken. Alicia stared in disbelief. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't moved a muscle. Justin, however, only saw a flustered, well-dressed white woman and a calm, unmoving black woman. He made a snap judgment. Ma'am, he said, directing his attention solely to Alicia. We need to keep the aisles clear and get this plane boarded. Please, just cooperate and move your bag. Your colleague is mistaken, Alicia stated, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. This woman is demanding the space above my seat. I have refused, as is my right. I have not been aggressive in any way. She's lying. Brenda cried, performing her distress with theatrical flair. She's creating a scene. I want to speak to the captain. I don't feel safe with her on this plane. Justin's eyes widened. The threat of a passenger feeling unsafe was a trigger for a whole new level of protocol. Instead of de-escalating, he doubled down on his initial assessment. Ma'am, he said to Alicia, his tone hardening into a threat. I'm going to ask you one more time to cooperate. If you can't follow a simple crew instruction, we're going to have a serious problem. Alicia looked from Justin's determined face to Brenda's triumphant smirk. She saw exactly how this was going to play out. The world of atomic clocks and celestial mechanics was logical and fair. The world inside this aluminum tube, she was being reminded, was anything but. Alicia looked from Justin's determined, flushed face to Brenda's triumphant smirk. In that suspended moment, the air in the cabin seemed to thin. Alicia Vance was a woman of science, a creature of cause and effect. In her laboratory, if you applied a specific force to an object, the result was predictable, measurable, and fair. But here, in row 12 of a Boeing 737, the laws of physics had been suspended. They had been replaced by the volatile, invisible laws of social hierarchy. There is no simple crew instruction to cede my designated space to another passenger based on her whim, Alicia said. Her voice remained low, a quiet vibration against the humming tension of the plane. If you wish to remove me from this flight, you will have to make that official decision. But I will not be bullied. That was all Justin needed to hear. He didn't hear a defense of rights. He heard defiance. He didn't see a professor. He saw a problem. He pressed the button on his shoulder radio, his eyes never leaving Alicia's face. Cockpit, this is the cabin. We have a non-compliant passenger in row 12, he stated, his voice echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence of the plane. Security needed at the gate. The gears of protocol, greased by prejudice, began to grind into motion. For 10 minutes, the plane sat in a heavy, awkward limbo. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged, but nobody moved. The arrival of the airline's ground security supervisor and 2 Port Authority officers felt like a surreal, slow-motion nightmare. The murmur of conversation on the plane died down, replaced by the craning of necks. The cabin had transformed into a Roman Colosseum, and Alicia was the gladiator who had refused to kneel. Phones began to emerge, discreetly at first, held low against chests, then more brazenly raised above seatbacks. Lenses focused. Red recording dots blinked. Alicia sat perfectly still, a lone island of composure in a rising sea of escalating absurdity. The supervisor, a stern-faced man named David Chun, marched down the aisle. He listened intently to Justin, who relayed a version of events that painted Alicia as an instigator, a woman who had disrupted the sanctity of the boarding process. Beside them, Brenda St. James dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue she didn't need, adding her own dramatic embellishments. I just felt so cornered, Brenda whispered, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. She cast a fearful glance at Alicia, clutching her pearls, metaphorically and literally. You just never know with people these days. Her tone was so unstable. I'm trembling. Mr. Chin nodded sympathetically at Brenda. He then turned to Alicia. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask for witnesses. He simply looked at the woman in 12B, saw the color of her skin, and applied the standard template for a disruptive passenger. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me, Chin said. On what grounds? Alicia asked. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the cold fury building in her gut. You failed to comply with crew instructions, and you are causing a disturbance, he recited, the lines delivered by rote. We can discuss this in the terminal. I have complied with every legitimate instruction, Alicia countered, her scientist's brain trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. I boarded. I stowed my bag in the correct location. I sat in my seat. Your crew member is asking me to yield to the unreasonable demands of another passenger. She gestured to the empty bin space across the aisle. The solution is right there. But instead of using it, you are escalating this. Toby, the student in the window seat, couldn't stay silent any longer. He pulled his headphones down around his neck. That's not what happened, he blurted out, looking at the supervisor. That blonde lady was completely out of line. She started it. This woman didn't do anything wrong. She was perfectly calm the whole time. The supervisor shot Toby a glare that suggested his input was about as welcome as a hull breach. Sir, please stay out of this. This is a security matter. Chin focused back on Alicia, his patience evaporating. We're holding up the entire flight. You have two options. You can walk off this plane with me now, or these officers will escort you off. It's your choice. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. To be paraded down the aisle like a criminal. To be the subject of whispers and judgmental looks. All because she had refused to be a doormat. Her instinct was to fight, to demand the captain, to pull up the FAA regulations on her phone and read them aloud, to scream that she was Dr. Alicia Vance, a lead physicist for the Department of Defense, and that she demanded respect. But then, she thought about the clock. T-minus 11 hours and 40 minutes. She thought about the Kronos 6 satellite sitting on the launch pad at Vandenberg. She thought about the 8 years of work, the encrypted keys in her laptop, and the fragile, intricate sequence that required her hand to initiate. Arguing with these men would take 20 minutes. Waiting for the captain might take 30. Being arrested for resisting removal would take days. These men were not here to listen to reason. They were here to solve a problem, and she had been designated as the problem. To fight them was to lose the mission. With a deep, controlled breath, Alicia Vance stood up. Fine, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. I will need my carry-on from the overhead bin. One of the officers retrieved the black case. As Alicia took it, her hand brushed against the biometric scanner embedded in the handle, a subconscious habit, a small, grounding reminder of who she actually was. She turned and began the long walk of shame down the aisle. The silence was deafening. She could feel Brenda St. James's smug gaze burning into her back. She could feel the hundreds of eyes. She saw the screens of the smartphones tracking her movement, broadcasting her lowest moment to the world. In that moment, to the passengers of Flight 712, she was just another angry black woman being dealt with, a stereotype being reinforced in real time. She kept her head high, her eyes focused on the exit door, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the heavy cabin door closed behind her with a definitive, final thud. Inside the plane, a smattering of applause broke out. Brenda St. James sat back in her seat, a serene smile on her face. The danger had been removed. Order had been restored. She took out her phone and texted her husband. Little drama on the plane, darling. Had to have someone removed. Some people are just so entitled. All sorted now. Brenda thought she had won. She had no idea that she had just initiated a chain reaction that would dismantle her entire world. On the jet bridge, the air was significantly colder than inside the cabin. It smelled of unburnt jet fuel, damp concrete, and the ozone tang of a brewing storm. Dr. Alicia Vance stood near the wall, her black case gripped tightly in her hand, while David Chun, the ground supervisor, finished typing something into his tablet with the nonchalance of a man ordering a sandwich. Our policy is zero tolerance for noncompliance, Chun said, not unkindly, but with the bureaucratic firmness of someone who believes the rules are a shield against all reality. Captain's discretion. His call was to have you removed. Alicia stared at him, the wind from the gap in the bridge ruffling her blazer. So a passenger can invent a fiction, your crew can escalate it without any attempt at verification, and the captain can eject another passenger without even speaking to them, she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is that the policy? The decision has been made, Dr. Vance, Chin said, tapping his screen. He didn't look up. He glanced at her boarding pass one last time. We can rebook you on a later flight to Los Angeles. The next one is in 3 hours. Alicia looked at her watch. The analog hands on the dial seemed to glare back at her. 3 hours. To Mr. Chun, 3 hours was an inconvenience. It was a voucher for a mediocre meal and a seat in the lounge. It was a complaint form filled out in triplicate. But in Alicia's world, the world of orbital mechanics and encrypted data windows, time was not a renewable resource. She did the math instantly. A 3-hour delay would translate to a 4-hour arrival gap once taxiing, deplaning, and transit to the base were factored in. The final pre-launch sequence for the Chronos 6 began in exactly 4 hours and 30 minutes. It was a sequence that required physical biometric authentication. It could not be done remotely. It could not be done by a deputy. It required her retina, her fingerprint, and her specific cryptographic key. A 3-hour delay wasn't an annoyance. It was a catastrophe. It was a mission failure. No, Alicia said. Her mind shifted gears instantly. She was no longer a wronged passenger arguing customer service. She was a lead physicist identifying a critical system failure. A later flight will not work. You have no idea what you have just done. Mr. Chin gave her a patronizing look, the kind reserved for overwrought travelers who think missing a meeting is the end of the world. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I assure you, Los Angeles will still be there in a few hours. Alicia didn't bother to reply to him. He was no longer a variable in the equation. He was merely an obstacle she had already bypassed. She turned away from him, pulling out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, bypassing the airline app entirely. She dialed a number that did not go to a customer service center. It went to a secure line that patched directly into the command center at Vandenberg Space Force Base. It was answered on the first ring. Fitzpatrick, a gruff voice barked. General, Alicia said, her voice stripped of all emotion, replaced by pure, focused urgency. This is Dr. Vance. We have a situation. A significant one. While Alicia was speaking on the jet bridge, Flight 712 pushed back from the gate. Inside the cockpit, Captain Miller, a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience, felt a pang of satisfaction. He had handled the situation by the book, backing his crew, removing the disruption, and ensuring an on-time departure. He guided the Boeing 737 into the long conga line of planes taxiing toward runway 31L, blissfully unaware that he was steering his career off a cliff. Back in the terminal, Alicia stood to the side, the cacophony of the airport fading into a dull roar as she pressed the phone to her ear. Repeat that, Doctor, General Marcus Fitzpatrick said. He was a man who oversaw the Department of Defense's interest in the Chronos project, a man who viewed situations as targets to be eliminated. I am not on Flight 712, Alicia stated clearly. I have been involuntarily deplaned at John F. Kennedy International Airport by the flight crew of Transcontinental Air. There was a moment of dead silence on the line. Alicia could almost hear the gears turning in the general's head, the calculations of time, distance, and consequence. Explain, he commanded. His voice was low, carrying the weight of someone who could scramble fighter jets with a single word. A dispute with another passenger was escalated by the crew, Alicia summarized, focusing on the outcome, not the insult. She didn't have time to explain Brenda St. James. The captain made the decision to have me removed. The plane is already pushed back. The next commercial flight lands too late. I will miss the final sequence window for the biometric integration. Another pause. Longer this time. General Fitzpatrick was looking at a $4.5 billion satellite, a cornerstone of the nation's next-generation global communications network. If Alicia didn't activate it, it was about to become the most expensive piece of space junk in history. Stay exactly where you are, Doctor, the general said, his voice dangerously calm. Do not move. I am making a call. The line went dead. Alicia immediately dialed her second number. This one went to the private cell of Richard Davies, the CEO of Stellaris Aerospace. Alicia, please tell me you're enjoying the in-flight movie, Richard answered cheerfully. Richard, she cut him off. I'm not on the plane. The cheerfulness vanished instantly. What? What are you talking about? I'm looking at the tracker. Flight 712 is taxiing. I was removed from the flight, Alicia said. She heard a sharp intake of breath followed by a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. Richard Davies understood risk and balance sheets better than anyone. He was currently staring at the financial annihilation of his company. Who did it? Why, he sputtered. Irrelevant right now, Alicia interrupted. General Fitzpatrick is aware. You need to get me to Vandenberg now. On it, Richard said, his voice buzzing with frantic energy. I'll scramble a company jet from Teterboro, but, Alicia, with flight planning in the drive, we're still cutting it too close. Damn it. While Richard panicked, General Fitzpatrick was making his call. It was to a very senior official at the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. The conversation was short, sharp, and it was not a request. This is General Fitzpatrick, U.S. Space Command, he said into his secure handset. I am invoking National Security Protocol 7 Delta. The FAA official on the other end sat up straighter. 7 Delta. It was a code rarely heard outside of catastrophic war games. You have a critical national security asset, codename Pathfinder, who has been separated from her transport, Fitzpatrick continued. Her transport is Transcontinental Flight 712. Currently taxiing for departure at JFK. We need that asset retrieved and placed on priority military transport immediately. General, the official started, we can try to contact the tower to hold the flight. I'm not finished, Fitzpatrick barked. Until we have positive confirmation that Pathfinder is secure, I need all air traffic at JFK grounded. All of it. Effective immediately. The official blinked. General, you want a full ground stop at JFK? On a Tuesday morning? For one person. That person is the key to a $4.5 billion national defense asset going live on schedule, Fitzpatrick retorted. Fail to do this, and the conversation you and I will be having with the Secretary of Defense in a few hours will be extremely unpleasant. Execute the order. The order, stamped with the highest possible priority, shot through the FAA's digital command structure like a lightning bolt. In the air traffic control tower at JFK, the hum of routine operations was shattered. A supervisor's screen flashed an urgent red bulletin. He read it, then read it again in disbelief. My God, he muttered. He keyed his microphone, his voice resonating with an authority that silenced all other chatter on the frequency. All stations. All stations. Attention all aircraft on the ground and in the New York TRACON. By order of FAA Command under National Security Protocol 7 Delta, John F. Kennedy International Airport is now under a full ground stop. I repeat, a full ground stop is in effect. The command echoed in the cockpits of 100 aircraft. All departures are halted. All arrivals are to be diverted. Halt all aircraft movement on all surfaces now. On the tarmac, the pilot of an American Airlines flight to London, number 1 in line for takeoff, slammed on his brakes. The nose gear compressed as the massive machine shuddered to a halt. Behind him, Captain Miller on Flight 712 brought his own massive aircraft to a lurching stop. What in the world? His first officer muttered, staring at the sudden paralysis of the runway. The line of planes, usually a snake of constant motion, had turned into a parking lot. National Security Protocol? Miller read the message flashing on his flight computer. What's going on? Captain Miller had no idea, but a cold, uneasy feeling began to creep into his gut. The kind of feeling that told him the minor security issue he had so efficiently resolved a few minutes ago might have been something else entirely. The silence of the radio was heavier than any turbulence he had ever flown through. For the first few minutes, the ground stop at JFK was processed by the collective consciousness of thousands of travelers not as a crisis, but as an annoyance. It was just another friction point in the grinding machinery of modern travel. On the miles of taxiways, the long lines of jets sat idling, their auxiliary power units whining, their pilots drumming fingers on yokes. Inside the terminal, departure boards flickered, the comforting yellow "on time" text cascading into a sea of red "delayed." But on board Flight 712, now stuck as the number 3 plane in the departure queue, the mood was strangely bifurcated. Most passengers grumbled, shifting in their cramped seats, checking watches, and sighing loudly. But in seat 12B, or rather, the now empty seat 12B, the absence of Dr. Alicia Vance was a void that one person was filling with immense satisfaction. Brenda St. James, having relocated to a more spacious seat in row 22 after the incident, was sipping a complimentary orange juice. She felt light, vindicated. The air conditioning hummed, and she reclined her seat, scrolling through her social media feed. She was already composing a post in her head about the decline of public standards and the burden of dealing with difficult people. The delay was irritating, certainly, but she viewed it as a small tax to pay for the restoration of her personal comfort. She turned to the passenger next to her, a businessman trying to read a report. "It's unbelievable what we have to put up with," Brenda said, gesturing vaguely at the window. "But at least it's quiet now. The energy was just so toxic before." The intercom crackled to life, interrupting her victory lap. It was Captain Miller. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain," Miller's voice said. It was different this time. Strained, higher-pitched, stripped of its usual aviator confidence. We have just been informed by air traffic control that the entire airport is under a full ground stop." A ripple of confusion moved through the cabin. A ground stop? The sun was shining. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. "All movement has been halted by federal authorities," Miller continued, choosing his words carefully. "This is a highly unusual situation. We have no further information at this time, but we will keep you updated. Please remain in your seats." Federal authorities. The words hung heavy in the recycled air. This wasn't a mechanical issue. This wasn't a baggage handler strike. This was the government slamming the brakes. Brenda rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp huff of air. "Probably some politician flying in," she said loudly to her neighbor. "They shut everything down for them. You know how it is. Utterly ridiculous that we have to wait for some VIP." She had no idea that the VIP was the woman she had just forced off the plane. In the air traffic control tower, the atmosphere was thick with panicked energy. Supervisors were barking into headsets, trying to manage the chaotic ballet of diverting incoming international heavyweights. "I have a Lufthansa A380 in a holding pattern with low fuel," one controller shouted. "Get him to Newark," the supervisor roared back. "We have 0 arrivals, 0 departures. JFK is a parking lot until further notice." Down in the terminal, the source of this chaos, Dr. Alicia Vance, was a statue of calm amidst the swirling storm of confused travelers. She stood near a floor-to-ceiling window, watching the frozen landscape of the tarmac. Her phone buzzed against her ear. "Okay, Alicia, listen," Richard Davies, the CEO of Stellaris Aerospace, said, his voice tight. "My Gulfstream is being fueled at Teterboro, but the ground stop has frozen them too. Nothing in or out of New York airspace. The general's call locked down everything." Alicia watched a baggage cart stop midway to a plane, the driver looking around in confusion. "The general doesn't do half measures, Richard." "But he's not done," Richard said. "Hang on." As if on cue, the crowd of frustrated passengers near gate C-34 seemed to part. Walking through the sea of humanity with a terrified urgency was a gate agent, her face pale. Flanking her were 2 men in dark suits who moved with the distinct, heavy grace of federal law enforcement. Behind them strode a woman in a sharp gray suit, wearing the ID badge of a transcontinental air corporate executive. The executive, Jennifer Larson, VP of Operations, looked like she had just seen a ghost. Or perhaps, she looked like she was witnessing the burning of a large pile of her own money. "Dr. Vance?" the gate agent asked, her voice trembling. I was told to find you. There are people here to see you." Alicia turned slowly. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look relieved. She looked like a woman checking a variable in an equation. "Dr. Vance," Jennifer Larson said, breathless. "I am so sorry. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." Alicia adjusted the strap of her black bag. I believe I said something to that effect about 45 minutes ago, she replied, her voice flat. We were just contacted by the Department of Defense, Larson stammered, wringing her hands. And by Stellaris Aerospace. We had no idea who you were, or the importance of your travel. The lead agent in the dark suit stepped forward. He wore an earpiece and carried himself with lethal professionalism. Dr. Vance, I'm Special Agent Miller, Diplomatic Security Service. We are your escort. General Fitzpatrick has arranged a military transport for you from the Air National Guard base on the other side of the airfield. How are we getting there if the airport is frozen? Alicia asked, the first practical question. The agent gave a grim, tight smile. Ma'am, when we move, things unfreeze just enough for us. Please come with me. They didn't walk toward the main exit. They headed for a restricted emergency access door leading directly to the tarmac. As they walked, the transcontinental executive, Jennifer Larson, was frantically speaking into her phone. Yes, I have her, Larson hissed into the device. Yes, I understand the liability. Get me Captain Miller on the radio. Patch me through to the cockpit of Flight 712. Do it now. Out on the taxiway, inside the silent cockpit of the Boeing 737, Captain Robert Miller was staring at the fuel gauge, calculating burn rates for an indefinite idle. His cockpit phone buzzed, a direct line request. He picked it up, expecting the tower. This is Captain Miller. Captain, this is Jennifer Larson, VP of Operations. Miller straightened up. A VP calling the cockpit? That never happened. Captain, Larson's voice was crystal clear and cold as liquid nitrogen. I need to know exactly why the passenger in seat 12B, Dr. Vance, was removed from your aircraft. Miller blinked. He felt a sudden, defensive spike. Ma'am, the passenger was non-compliant and was causing a disturbance according to my flight crew. She was being aggressive toward another passenger, a Mrs. St. James, and refused to follow instructions. He took a breath, falling back on the standard script. I used my discretion to have her removed to ensure the safety and comfort of the other passengers and to facilitate an on-time departure. He said the words on-time departure and immediately felt like an idiot. He was sitting on a runway that was going nowhere. There was a chilling silence on the other end of the line. When Larson spoke again, her voice wasn't angry. It was the voice of an executioner reading a sentence. Captain, let me be clear, Larson said. The passenger you removed is Dr. Alicia Vance. She is the lead scientist for the Kronos 6 satellite program. The Department of Defense considers her travel to be a matter of supreme national security. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. His hand tightened on the receiver. Because she is not on your plane, she is going to miss a critical launch window, Larson continued, hammering every nail into the coffin of his career. And because of that, the entire airport, including your plane, has been shut down by the United States government. Captain Robert Miller looked out the cockpit window at the endless line of silent, waiting planes. He saw the heat shimmer rising off the tarmac. He saw the other pilots in the plane ahead of him, looking around confused. All of it, because he trusted a panicked flight attendant over a quiet passenger he hadn't even bothered to look at. Oh my God, Miller whispered, his voice cracking. What have I done? Your disturbance is about to cost this airline millions of dollars in delay penalties, Larson added, twisting the knife. And it will likely cost us our military transport contracts. Your aggressive passenger is currently being escorted onto a military jet while your plane sits there. You followed the book, Captain. The problem is, you were reading the wrong one. Miller slowly lowered the phone. The silence in the cockpit was absolute. Beside him, his first officer looked over, concerned by the captain's ghostly pallor. Skipper, the first officer asked. Are we good? Miller didn't answer. He couldn't. The ice-cold dread in his gut had crystallized into a horrifying certainty. He had just flown his last flight. The news, as it always does in the modern age, broke on social media first. It did not start with a formal press release or a cable news cheering. It started with a thumb hovering over a post button in seat 12A. Toby, the student who had sat next to Alicia, had filmed the entire incident. He had captured the initial argument, the flight attendant's immediate bias, Alicia's terrifying calm, Brenda's theatrical histrionics, and the final, humiliating escort off the plane. For the last hour, he had debated what to do with the footage. Then, a news alert popped up on his screen, JFK at a standstill. Sources cite national security asset extraction as reason for unprecedented ground stop. Toby looked at the empty seat next to him. He looked at the grainy video on his phone. The pieces clicked together with a deafening snap. No way, he breathed, turning to the empty middle seat. No freaking way. He opened Twitter, X. He uploaded the raw, unedited 2-minute clip. He typed a simple caption, "The security risk that got kicked off my flight at JFK. Now the whole airport is shut down. This is the woman they escorted. You decide who the problem is. Hashtag JFK, hashtag groundstop, hashtag flying while black." He hit send. The video was rocket fuel poured onto the fire of a bored, frustrated internet. Within minutes, it had hundreds of retweets. Then thousands. The ground stop had left tens of thousands of passengers across the country stuck in terminals with nothing to do but scroll through their phones. They were a captive audience hungry for a villain, and Toby had just served them one on a silver platter. The video was damning. It showed Alicia Vance sitting perfectly still, speaking in a low, measured tone. It showed Brenda St. James standing over her, face flushed, screeching about matched luggage and feeling unsafe. It showed Justin, the flight attendant, ignoring the aggressor to punish the victim. The hashtags began to trend immediately. Hashtag JFK shutdown, hashtag seat 12B, and hashtag Brenda St. James. In seat 22D, Brenda St. James was oblivious. She was still insulated in her bubble of self-righteousness, complaining to her seatmate about the incompetence of the airline. First the riffraff, now this delay, she sighed, adjusting her cashmere shawl. Can they do anything right? Then, her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. A rapid-fire staccato of vibration that rattled against the armrest. Annoyed, she finally picked it up. It was her husband, Jonathan St. James. He was calling. She declined the call, texting him back, stuck on tarmac. Can't talk. The phone rang again immediately. She frowned. Jonathan knew better than to call repeatedly during a travel day. She declined it again. Then the text started. Not from Jonathan, but from her friends. Her sister. Her yoga instructor. Brenda, is that you? Oh my God. Brenda, look at Twitter. Why is your face on CNN? Confused, Brenda opened her messages. The most recent one was from Jonathan. It wasn't a question. It was a command written in all caps. What did you do? Call me immediately. Following that text was a link to a financial news alert. Brenda tapped it, her brow furrowing. Stellaris Aerospace, SLRX, stock plummets 15%. In pre-market trading amid rumors of catastrophic launch delay of Kronos 6 satellite. Brenda stared at the screen. Stellaris Aerospace. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Then, the memory hit her like a physical slap. Jonathan's firm, St. James Capital, had just led a massive $500 million investment round in Stellaris. It was the biggest deal of his year. It was the deal that was supposed to pay for the renovations in the Hamptons. Her blood ran cold. She clicked the next link, a trending Twitter topic. The first thing she saw was Toby's video. It was autoplaying. She saw her own face, distorted by anger. She heard her own voice, shrill and demanding, echoing through her phone speaker. I don't feel safe. She's being aggressive. And then she saw the face of the woman she had thrown off the plane. Alicia Vance. Calm. Dignified. Silent. Brenda scrolled down to the comments. They were a tidal wave of condemnation. This is Brenda St. James, wife of Jonathan St. James. She just single-handedly cost her husband's company a fortune. She weaponized her tears and her privilege, and it literally grounded the busiest airport in the country. Imagine being so entitled you stop air traffic on the entire East Coast. Brenda felt the cabin walls closing in. The air suddenly felt too thin. She looked up, and for the first time, she noticed the atmosphere in the plane had shifted. People around her were holding their phones up. They weren't looking at the screens, they were looking at her. That's her, a man in the row behind whispered. It wasn't a quiet whisper. The woman from the video. That's the lady who got us stuck here. A woman across the aisle hissed to her partner. The anonymity Brenda had regained by moving seats was stripped away. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the cause. She was the villain in a story currently being watched by millions of people. Her phone rang again. Jonathan. This time, Her hand shaking so badly, she almost dropped the device. She answered. Jonathan, She was cut off by a roar of pure, unadulterated fury. I don't know what you did, Brenda. Jonathan yelled, his voice ragged with panic. But you had better fix it. The Department of Defense is on the phone with our investors. The Stellaris board is calling for my head. Our firm's name is being dragged through the mud on national television. I just asked her to move her bag, Brenda stammered, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, born of terror, not manipulation. The story is that a racially motivated incident on board caused the lead scientist to miss the flight. Jonathan screamed. Tell me it wasn't you, Brenda. Lie to me right now and tell me you didn't get the lead scientist of the project I just invested $500 million and kicked off a plane. Brenda couldn't speak. She could only sit there, the phone pressed to her ear, as the full, crushing weight of her actions descended upon her. She had not just caused a scene. She had, in a fit of pique, thrown a multi-million-dollar grenade into her husband's career. She had become a global pariah in the span of 45 minutes. They're saying you grounded the airport, Brenda. Jonathan's voice broke, dropping to a horrified whisper. Do you understand? You are the reason the stock is tanking. She looked around the cabin. The passengers were no longer averting their eyes. They were staring at her with open hostility. The applause she had heard when Alicia was removed now seemed like a distant, mocking echo from a different life. Karma wasn't just coming for her. It had arrived, and it was sitting in every seat on the plane. And because of the ground stop she had caused, she couldn't even run away. She was trapped in a metal tube with 150 people who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she had done. While Brenda St. James's personal universe was imploding in row 22, the professional worlds of the men who had enabled her were being systematically and mercilessly dismantled. In the cockpit of the stationary Flight 712, Captain Robert Miller was holding his phone so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The voice of Jennifer Larson, the VP of Operations, was no longer a human voice. It was the sound of a guillotine blade sliding down its track. Every word she spoke was a hammer blow against the foundation of his 30-year career. Miller had spent the last decade envisioning his retirement. He saw a gold watch, a celebratory dinner, handshakes, and the quiet satisfaction of a career defined by clean skies and safe landings. He now saw that future evaporating into a haze of legal depositions, media disgrace, and forced resignation. Do you understand what I am telling you? Larson's voice drilled into his ear, devoid of any sympathy. The Department of Defense is accusing Transcontinental Air of compromising a mission of national importance. That is the official language being used, Captain, and it is being laid directly at the feet of the crew of Flight 712. His first officer, Ben, stared at him, his own face a mask of horrified comprehension. Captain, Ben whispered. Miller held up a hand to silence him, trying to absorb the sheer scale of the catastrophe. He remembered his own smug satisfaction after removing Alicia, the quick, decisive action he believed he'd taken to maintain order. He had backed his crew. He had followed the procedure for a disruptive passenger. But he had skipped the most crucial step of command, independent assessment. He had taken Justin's panicked, biased report as gospel, colored by the theatrics of a wealthy-looking woman. He had never once laid eyes on Dr. Alicia Vance. He had condemned her, and in doing so, condemned himself, sight unseen. A digitally signed order flashed onto his cockpit display, overriding the flight plan. It was from the airline's chief of flight operations. The text was brutally concise. Flight 712 grounded indefinitely. Await instruction to return to gate. Do not communicate with ATC for any reason other than a direct safety emergency. Below the text were two buttons, acknowledge and decline. The decline button was grayed out. Miller stared at the screen. He was no longer a captain in command. He was a prisoner in his own cockpit, waiting for his sentence to be carried out. A few dozen feet away, in the rear galley, a similar scene of career annihilation was playing out for Justin, the flight attendant. His supervisor, a veteran purser named Maria, had pulled him into the small, curtained space. The forced smiles and customer service platitudes were gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. She held up her company-issued tablet, the screen showing the viral video Toby had posted. Is this you, Justin? She asked, her voice dangerously low. Justin's face was ashen. Maria, I was following protocol. She was non-compliant. The other passenger felt threatened. The other passenger was a liar. And you were a fool. Maria snapped, her professional veneer cracking. Your job is to de-escalate. It is to observe, assess, and make a judgment. Did you see this supposed aggression? Did you hear a raised voice from Dr. Vance? Well, no, but Brenda, the other passenger, she was very upset. She was performing. Maria hissed. And you gave her exactly the audience she wanted. You didn't see a calm, professional woman being harassed. You saw a stereotype, and you reacted to it. She tapped the screen again. Corporate has been calling nonstop. Our union rep can't even get through to them. They've already made their decision. They're meeting us at the gate. You're suspended without pay, effective the moment the door opens. An investigation will be launched, but we both know what the conclusion will be. You're a liability, Justin. Your face is now the poster child for corporate prejudice. Justin leaned against the galley counter, the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. He wasn't just losing his job, he was becoming infamous. His life was now inextricably linked to this humiliating video, a permanent digital stain that would follow him to any future job interview, any new city. He had acted on impulse and bias, and the consequences were absolute. Outside, on the vast expanse of the airfield, a different kind of precision was on display. The black government SUV carrying Dr. Alicia Vance sliced across the tarmac with an authority that superseded all airport regulations. It screeched to a halt at the base of a waiting C-130 Hercules transport plane. Its 4 powerful turboprop engines were already spinning, creating a deafening roar that shook the pavement. As Alicia stepped out of the vehicle, the wind whipping her hair, one of the diplomatic security agents handed her a ruggedized satellite phone. General Fitzpatrick, for you, ma'am, he shouted over the scream of the engines. Alicia pressed the phone to her ear. Doctor, the general's voice barked. Are you good to go? I am focused, General, she replied, her voice a bastion of calm amidst the storm. The mission is the only thing that matters now. Good, he said. You handle the science. I'll handle the fallout. As she ascended the steep ramp into the cavernous, Spartan interior of the military transport, the head of the FAA officially lifted the ground stop for John F. Kennedy International Airport. The total shutdown had lasted 58 minutes. The domino effect, however, would ripple through the national and international air travel systems for days. Flight 712, the epicenter of the disruption, was among the last to be given permission to move, but it was not cleared for takeoff. It was instructed to return to gate C-34. The captain's voice came over the intercom, a ghost of the confident aviator from an hour ago. It was hollow, strained, and devoid of all authority. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been instructed to return to the gate. Our flight to Los Angeles has been canceled. A wave of enraged groans and curses filled the cabin. Travel plans, business meetings, family reunions, all shredded in an instant. The collective anger in the tube was palpable, a physical heat. As the plane docked and the jet bridge reconnected, the gate agent made the final, devastating announcement over the PA system. We will begin deplaning momentarily. We ask that all passengers have their boarding passes ready. The agent paused, the silence stretching. However, for passenger Brenda St. James, Miss St. James, please remain in your seat until all other passengers have exited the aircraft. Airline representatives and security will meet you on board. If a pin had dropped, it would have sounded like a bomb. Every eye on the plane swiveled to row 22. The anonymity Brenda had briefly regained was stripped away for the second time, this time by official decree. She was the designated pariah. The deplaning process was a slow, agonizing parade of scorn. Passengers who had earlier been her audience now became her jury. They filed past her, their faces a mixture of anger and disgust. You ruined my vacation, one woman hissed, leaning in close. A businessman, looking at his watch, simply shook his head and muttered, unbelievable. Toby, the student, walked past her with his phone out, filming the aftermath. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. When the last passenger had gone, 2 Port Authority officers, their faces impassive, stood at the front of the plane. They were joined by Jennifer Larson herself, who had come down from the corporate office, her face a mask of cold fury, and a man in a crisp suit carrying a leather briefcase. an airline lawyer. Miss St. James, Larson began, dispensing with any courtesy. On behalf of Transcontinental Air, I am informing you that you are hereby banned from flying on this airline and any of our partner airlines for life. Brenda sat frozen, clutching her designer bag as if it could protect her. Furthermore, Larson continued, our legal department will be pursuing a civil claim against you for the full cost of the disruption you willfully caused today, a figure currently estimated to be in excess of $2 million. She gestured to the lawyer. You will be hearing from him. These officers will now escort you to a private room where you will be questioned about the incident. Do you understand, Brenda? Brenda's face, pale and streaked with mascara, could only nod mutely. The power she had wielded so casually had turned on her with savage force. Thousands of miles away, the C-130 screamed toward the California coast. It landed on a military runway at Vandenberg, taxiing to a stop directly beside the Mission Control Center. Dr. Alicia Vance descended the ramp, her black carry-on in hand, and walked into the climate-controlled, pressurized facility with 3 minutes to spare before the final launch window closed. The room was a cathedral of silent tension. Dozens of the world's brightest engineers and scientists sat at their consoles, their faces etched with anxiety. When they saw her, a collective, inaudible sigh of relief swept through the room. Alicia didn't speak a word about JFK. She didn't mention the humiliation or the SUV ride. She simply walked to her console, sat down, and placed her hand on the biometric scanner. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, her mind a universe away from the petty drama of Flight 712. On the main screen, a series of verification codes flashed from red to green. Biometric authentication confirmed, she announced, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the silence. Cryptographic handshake is complete. The array is secure. Aries, 7, you are green for final launch sequence. From across the room, General Fitzpatrick locked eyes with her. He gave her a single, sharp nod, a gesture of profound respect from one consummate professional to another. She had not only saved the mission, she had embodied it. Weeks later, the noise had begun to fade. The 24-hour news cycle had moved on, finding new scandals to devour. But the echoes of that Tuesday at JFK remained, subtle, yet profound. Dr. Alicia Vance stood on a viewing platform at Stellaris Aerospace headquarters, looking up at a massive, wall-sized screen. The screen displayed a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of the Earth, a breathtaking swirl of azure oceans, white clouds, and emerald continents. It was the first official image sent back by the Kronos 6 satellite, now fully operational in its geosynchronous orbit. It was perfect. Richard Davies, the CEO, stood beside her. His company had not only survived, it was thriving. The successful launch had rallied the stock, and the publicity, though initially terrifying, had morphed into a testament to the company's importance. You know, Richard said quietly, Transcontinental has offered you free first-class flights for life as part of their settlement package. Alicia gave a small, wry smile, her eyes never leaving the image of the planet. I think I'll be flying private from now on, Richard. He chuckled. Don't blame you. We also received the official findings from their internal investigation today. He paused, his tone shifting from light to somber. Justin, the flight attendant, was terminated. Captain Miller took a forced early retirement to avoid a formal inquiry. His pilot's license is permanently under review. His career is effectively over. David Chun, the ground supervisor, was demoted and reassigned to a logistics desk in Anchorage. And Brenda St. James? Alicia asked. She held no malice in her voice, only a detached curiosity, like a scientist observing the result of an experiment. Lost everything, Richard said. The divorce was swift and brutal. Jonathan St. James needed to sever ties to save his firm's reputation. She's a social pariah. Last I heard, she sold the Hamptons house and moved somewhere quiet to escape the infamy. The internet calls her the JFK Karen. She can't walk into a coffee shop without someone filming her. Alicia nodded slowly, taking it all in. There was no joy in their ruin, no sense of victorious gloating. There was only a profound sadness that it had happened at all. She had not sought this outcome. She had simply sought to be treated with the basic dignity any human being deserves. The universe, aided by a cell phone camera and the unyielding laws of physics and finance, had handled the rest. Dr. Vance, a young intern, interrupted, approaching with a tablet. General Fitzpatrick is on a secure line for you. He wants to congratulate you on the image clarity. Alicia turned away from the screen and toward the future. The incident on the plane had been a detour, a moment of ugly, terrestrial friction in a life spent gazing at the stars. It had exposed a deep-seated prejudice, but it had also revealed a deeper truth, that competence, grace, and unwavering integrity are their own form of power. It was a power that, when challenged, could bring the world to a halt and then, just as quietly, set it back in motion. "Tell the general I'm coming," she said. Her work was in the heavens, and she refused to be dragged down by the small, petty squabbles of Earth. She had a universe to explore. Dr. Alicia Vance's story is a stark reminder that the person you underestimate today could be the one the whole world is waiting for tomorrow. It is a lesson in the immense cost of prejudice and the quiet, unshakable power of dignity. Her vindication wasn't loud or vengeful. It was the silent, undeniable fact that without her, progress would stop. This event wasn't just about one flight. It was a mirror reflecting the biases that too many people face every single day, in airports, in offices, and on the street. The karma that unfolded wasn't magic. It was the logical, crushing consequence of underestimating the wrong woman. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that grace under pressure deserves to be celebrated, please hit that like button. Share this video so others can hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories where justice delivers the final verdict. And I want to hear from you. What is the most blatant example of instant karma you have ever witnessed? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.